everyone. My name is Ashanta, and I am with Catalyst Press. We're really excited for this panel. This is the final event of our Reading Africa Week celebration, where we celebrate all the diversity and great things about African lit. So this panel features a host of fantastic women, several of whom are having some technical difficulties, but we will fix this. So I'll just start off by introducing everyone, and then I will pass it off to our moderator. So first off is Sifton Anipare. She is a Ghanaian-Canadian writer who has lived and taught in Japan for 4 years, or who lived and taught in Japan for 4 years. She loves video games, bubble tea, Japanese coffee mixes, and is an avid collector of stickers and stamps. And Yume, published by Dundurn Press, is her first novel. Sifton will be joining us slightly later in the conversation. Next up, we have Gabeba Baderoon. She's an associate professor of women's gender and sexuality studies and African studies at Penn State, and is co-director of the university's African Feminist Initiative. She's also the co-editor of Surfacing on Being Black and Feminist in South Africa. Yewande Omotosho is an architect with a master's in creative writing from the University of Cape Town. She is the author of The Woman Next Door, which was shortlisted for the International Dublin Literary Award, the Edu Snyder Prize, the Barry Orange Fiction Prize, and the UJ Literary Prize. We were thrilled to publish her novel, Bomb Boy, and she has a forthcoming novel called An Unusual Grief that's coming out with Cassava Press. And finally, and she's not here because I really needed her help with pronouncing her name. Aoife, maybe you can help me with
yes,
this.
it's Chiluchi Onyewemelukwe Onywabia.
Thank you. She's a lawyer, academic, and writer. She works in the areas of health, gender, and violence against women and children. She is the author of The Son of the House, which was recently awarded the 2021 Nigeria Prize for Literature. And moderating this fantastic group is Aoife Lennon-Ritchie. She is the head of she's the head of the Lennon-Ritchie Agency, a literary agency based in Cape Town. Their award-winning books include The Son of the House, A Sin of Omission by Marguerite Poland, The Theory of Flight by Sifton Gloria. Yes, which I'm so embarrassed because we are the US publisher of that book. Please forgive me, Sifton. Among many others. She also sells international film and TV rights for publishing houses and is also the managing partner of Torchwood, a literary agency for film and television, representing screenwriters, directors, and producers worldwide. I'm thrilled to have everyone here. And again, for everyone who's following along, make sure to use the hashtag Reading Africa if you'd like to share some of your thoughts about the wonderful world of African lit. And with that, I'm going to disappear and let Aoife take over.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Ashanta. That was really fantastic. And it is such a privilege and a pleasure to be here tonight or this afternoon and to talk to these incredible women about their amazing work. I guess since it's just Gabeba and myself for now, let's talk about surfacing. We can jump straight in. So this is a question I want to ask all of the women when we have a full panel, but I would really love to hear from you about this. So I gave a talk a few weeks ago with my male partner of my other literary agency, where we said that we were really looking for more women. We want to hear more women voices. And please, if you have something, submit it to us. We'd love to see it. There must have been about 100 people at that talk. And the following day, we got 30 submissions. And I think 28 of them were from men. So I would love to ask, Chiluchi is on her way. So to me, I want to ask, I know that it takes an awful lot of courage and strength to decide, yes, this book is good enough to be published, and then to go down that road, because there is a lot of rejection and there's a lot of heartache. So I want to ask all of you where you found the strength and the courage and the self-confidence, not only to write a book that got published, but to push it all the way from the page to the bookcase and the bookshelf.
Mm-hmm. Shall I go first?
Yes, please.
The first book I published, actually I have a copy of it here, is a book of poetry, and I was leaning my computer on it. And the way that came about is I had been going to a series of evening classes in poetry because I really was a beginner. I at the age of 30, took my first class in poetry. And I was so pleased with doing my homework that I sent these poems off to a couple of friends of mine, Kira Petsi and Ingrid Fisk. And before I knew it, I received an email from Gus Ferguson, the publisher at Snail Press, saying, "So what do you want on the cover of your book, Gabeba?" And it would not have occurred to me to send it in this way. I would not have had the courage to think of myself as a poet. I thought of myself as a beginner, struggling along with homework. And so it's interesting that you asked this fantastic question. I think I was nudged by other people. And I think it's very important to explore why we don't envisage ourselves in the role that you're talking about, which is, why don't we see our name on books like this? And this is partly the motivation behind surfacing as well, to take that absence and to refuse it, and to explore the forms in which we write without feeling apologetic about that. So thank you for inviting me to think again about the accident of my first book.
Okay, well, congratulations. It's wonderful to have someone like Ingrid Fisk as a friend who happens to, have another friend who's a publisher. I mean, what an amazing first reader to have. And yeah, I think a part of that obviously is that we must all cultivate these wonderful relationships with other women who have experience and have trod the path before us and can teach us and help us and guide us. So I saw that Chaluchi was on, but I fear that she may have dropped off again, because I would love to ask her that question as well. But and I think Sifton is indisposed just now. So Gabeba, if you are happy, why don't we just keep talking, just the two of us, if you're happy. So you had, so I love the way you said that to refuse the silence. I love that phrase. Can you tell me a little bit more about how this new book came about?
Yes, I think you constitute an infrastructure as well, being a literary agent and a woman, and based in Africa, all of which are very important. And it happened that the Black feminist commissioning editor at Wits University Press invited me for tea one day in 2017 and proposed this book. And it had been since 1994 that a book specifically on South African feminisms had come out. And it occurred to me, I can see this book instantly being on my syllabus to be teaching African studies and to be teaching feminist studies, which is what I do. And why hadn't I thought about the absence of its existence? But fortunately she did, Roshan Kader, and with her inspiration, as well as with the fundamental role of Desiree Lewis, the first co-editor, this book has come into being, and now it exists, and I'm hoping it will be on many syllabi. And more than that, I hope it will have an audience that loves good writing, because that is the primary characteristic of this book. It's brilliant writing.
That's fantastic. Chaluchi, are you there? Itzhak, are you able to unmute Chaluchi?
Chaluchi is muted, and I'm trying to see. Just give me a second. Chaluchi,
Sure.
can you unmute your computer, because I'm trying to unmute you, and now she's gone again.
Let's see.
Oh dear.
No, not to worry. So Gabeba, just to continue on what you were talking about, this collection of essays, can you tell me why this felt like the best format, the best structure for these ideas?
Yes. Part of the way in which authority has been crafted in the South African public sphere, say by major intellectuals, by politicians, by commentators and thought leaders, is by using authoritative forms. And one of the reasons that women's thoughts, philosophy, political ideas often don't get disseminated and don't have the visibility of male writers is because we use a greater variety of forms, and because it has been possible to articulate very different life experiences and ideas in forms like the personal essay, which has not been given the same level of authority in the public sphere. So this book is a very deliberate use of that form, the personal essay, and all of its richness, all of its beauty, all of its denseness of thought, all of its vividness and its innovation, and bring these 20 personal essays together and to show how they can move our understanding of the world, both the deepest interior world as well as the broadest public world. And I think it achieves that really magnificently. Of course, I'm biased because I'm an editor, but that simply means that I've read these essays many times.
And closely as well.
The pleasure remains after several readings. So yeah, so a powerful and also very pleasurable form is the personal essay.
And that's often the test when you are working very closely with the text. Does it still make your heart beat faster on the 7th close reading? I like the way you talked about authority, and I think this form does bring authority to these thoughts and these ideas and gives them real standing in a way that's, hopefully going to be appreciated for many, many years to come. So Chaluchi is having network issues. It keeps kicking her out, and we've just found out that Yewande won't be joining us. She has contracted COVID. So thank you, pandemic. But hopefully Yewande will recover very quickly. I have heard all anecdotal evidence, of course, that this new variant is much milder than the last. So hopefully that's true for Yewande as well. Can you tell me a little bit, Gabeba, about your process curating the work? How did you choose the women that came to write the essays? How did you help them structure their work? And I'd just love to hear a little more about the process of putting the book together.
I heard a talk yesterday about African feminism as method, and one of the methods identified there is the diffuse networks of connections among African feminists who often don't have public visibility. And so networks that are less visible are a matter of surviving, but they're also a very effective way of organizing energies and support. And in fact, I've been part of South African feminist networks since the 1990s. They have deeply nourished me. And Desiree and I, who were part of the same networks, the same groups, drew on this ancient, by now, gathering of sisterhood. And we also knew that we couldn't limit ourselves to the people who had been our friends for 30 years, though we could have. But fortunately, we didn't. We drew on generational spread of thinkers. We drew on people who weren't our own personal friends. We drew on people who dealt with genres other than the literary, which is where Desiree and I both started from. She is now a much broader scholar, and I am a scholar as well as a poet. So we expanded our networks in order to represent Black feminism in South Africa to the best of our ability, without claiming that this is the encyclopedic version of that, that subject. So I'm extremely proud of the way in which this book defines South African feminism. You'll notice that there are writers from Kenya, from Eswatini, from Zimbabwe. There are obviously writers who challenge the notion of, if you have a South African passport, this makes you South African. Because the richness of South African debates about feminism has not stopped with those who hold a legal definition of South Africanness. And in order to accurately reflect then the wealth of ideas, what we decided to do was to invite those people who were participating in the debates, who were enlarging the debates, who were enriching our thinking to participate. And I am so grateful that they accepted this invitation. We also invited them to write about the themes that were important in their view regarding Black feminism in South Africa. And so you'll see that it's by no means a provincial definition. Yes, we do write intimately about ourselves, our hometowns, our families, but we also in this collection write about Palestine and engagements with feminist activists from all over the world. So that definition and that vision of what enriches South African debates through participation, I think helped us to produce a book that in itself is rich in its thoughts and its own contribution, I think, to this debate.
And were there any people who came along with something that was very surprising to you, or came along with a point of view that you hadn't expected or hadn't considered, or just were blown away by in some way?
Oh, absolutely. I have numerous favorites, and I'll probably have to list 20 in order to be fair, but I completely adore Grace Musila's essay on what it is like to be a woman whose accomplishments grow and grow and grow as she does, and then who has to deal with the anxieties that this generates in men. And the way she writes about it in her essay, My Two Husbands, is so beautiful, so evocative, and makes its argument so powerfully, but in a way that is completely unexpected. It was for me as a reader. I also love Makosazana Xaba's essay on orgasm and what it is like to love oneself, one's body, and to envisage that love as being profoundly healthy and political. And so orgasms, and then also the debate that Zoe Wickham and Desiree Lewis engage in, which does not shy away from differences, divergences, disagreements among feminists, which is also important to attend to, because we certainly have that. And so those are among, I should mention the final section, which is on visions of the future, dreams of the future, because of course this book was a dream that came into being, and it also dreams African feminist futures. And for that, I love the essays of Yvette Abrams and Patricia McFadden for what they allow us to see before our eyes through their words. The earth itself becomes a part of this future, and it's lovely reading. I recommend them.
Well, I think you should be marketing this book yourself everywhere. I think your descriptions of it are so wonderful and so warm, and I think will make us all just want to go and buy 5 copies for all our friends.
Please do.
Yes, everybody, do you hear that? You must all go and buy some.
I'm
So
for
not with
specialist. I'm quite astoundingly interested in marketing. I feel I always have to apologize for that, for the
Oh no, you mustn't. I mean, I think now as well, authors are expected, not for every genre or every kind of book, but I think authors are expected to sell their souls a little when it comes to getting the book into readers' hands. Have you had to do much marketing yourself?
Yes, Wits, and I contrast this with my experience with US publishers. Wits is wonderfully generous and attentive to launches, questions like book launches, and also interviews, reviews, etc. You know, it's really fantastic. Entering books for awards. There's much more of a DIY approach in the US, where you organize your own launches, and if you're lucky enough to have a book tour, you do your own marketing. So I've now published my first book in the US, and I participated in launches and that were organized by ourselves with the assistance of the publisher. It's
is this surfacing as well, or a different book?
No, it's I don't know if you remember my book, The History of Intimacy, came out in this exquisite edition by Quella, which has a photograph that was taken in my mother's back garden of some sparrows. And this is the US edition, which just came out this year, which is 3 years after the Quella edition. And this is an imagining, it's not actually a photograph, but it's an imagining of the scene where I lived for a while in Cape Town, just outside Simonstown. So it is a very beautiful version of the book. And I'm so happy to hold in my hands both of them. They're just aesthetically so pleasing.
They are beautiful objects. And you can't always say that about books. It's such a beautiful thing. They say don't judge a book by a cover, but yes, you must in this case. Absolutely can. And so tell us a bit. So this is one thing I want to ask all the writers when we have them all together. But I think it's going to be very important for you as well. And that's the idea of migration. And you touched on that a little about women who have moved. So either you're frozen or I am. So I just thought I'd pause to see who it is. Okay, you're nodding again. So perhaps it's not me. There were lots of essays in your book by women who had found themselves in South Africa. And I think all of the women writers here have either lived overseas or are living overseas. And I'd love to know how this informs your writing. Do you write then to teach the people where you are about this experience? Do you use it to explore this experience? What does this mean to you in your writing?
Moving was precisely when I first took an evening class in poetry. I was moving very temporarily. I had a fellowship at Penn State University, where I happen to teach right now. And in order to explore the newness of being outside of the country, I took on new things, among which was poetry. And inevitably, with the freedom of being a complete beginner and of welcoming my mistakes, I wrote about that experience of leaving, the strangeness of it, also the strange newness of old things when you've moved, when you've shifted your perspective. that entered my writing from the beginning. It also was not that I was explaining anything to other people, because I had not learned to write that way. I learned to write to do my homework, and to please myself to the extent that I thought this would please my teachers. So I think I've continued with that, is to not write an explanation or explanatory mode as much as to write deeply within an experience. And I found that some of what I was writing deeply about had to do with being in South Africa, which is sometimes also where my imagination is, literally. When I fall asleep, I sometimes hear the sounds of my house in Cape Town. And also where my imagination is noticing the differences or the bridging experiences or the longing of one. I sometimes, my imagination is not sufficiently in the US to write about the US. So that has been interesting to me, to recognize how little I've written about the US. And maybe that's inevitable because South Africa is so rich in my imagination, but it's also an absence, and I try to refuse absences. So I might have to challenge myself to write a bit more.
And do you think you will? Do you think you will maybe perhaps set something in the States and explore South Africa from that lens, or is that perhaps not something that you're keen to do?
That's wonderful. I haven't thought about how the US will feature. Sometimes I've written about the US. I wonder if I have written in the way you've asked, which is from the US to look at South Africa. I don't think I've done that. I've always claimed an intimacy with South Africa, and maybe I don't have the right to exactly. I don't know. I'll have to think about what the US will be for me when I allow it to, because
I completely understand. I completely understand that. I've been in South Africa for nearly 15 years, but my children were born here. I'm totally South African in many ways, but I would never dream of imagining myself as a South African. I mean, so I do completely understand that idea. Yes, and thank you for putting it so well. I loved what you just said a moment ago, and I'd love to ask you a bit more about that, the strange newness of old. That's just such a lovely idea, and it's so true. When you move somewhere new, you forget what you've taken for granted, or at least you become aware of what you've taken for granted in another context. So can you tell me a little about the strange newness of old things? What are the old things that became strangely new for you?
When I moved to the US, the reason I moved after that fellowship I mentioned was that I had gotten married to an American. To my surprise, I really was not expecting this. I certainly never planned to leave South Africa. But when we moved in together, it happened that he had lots of his parents' belongings that we could then, there was a couch, there was a table, and I eventually found myself surrounded by at least the things that belonged to his family. I had to somehow claim this space myself, because otherwise I'd feel continually like a visitor. And it was through my childhood photographs that I did this. And it was very strange to me to put a framed photograph of a baby me in, just a corner, not any very visible place, but it was sufficiently there so that I felt that I had established a root. I had established a belonging. And these were photographs that I had never looked at in South Africa. I certainly never put them in frames. They were blurry photographs. They were sometimes photographs that have been folded and didn't look like you should put them in a frame. But they were so important to me, and they become strange to me in a way that allowed me to claim this strange new place.
Yeah,
So
and to place you within this family. And
exactly,
this, yeah,
exactly.
I love that.
Mm,
Love
yeah.
that. I see Sifton, welcome.
Yeah.
Please, you're going away again. Welcome, it's lovely to meet you. You are muted.
We go. Sorry.
Hi.
I just realized my phone was like dying 2 seconds before you said my name. I'm like, oh no, I gotta save this.
Oh no.
Okay, so I think I'm good now. But hi,
okay,
nice
great.
to meet you.
Hey. It's lovely to meet you. We have had such a wonderful conversation. There are a couple of questions that I want to pass to you
Sure.
as well. So I'm not sure what we're going to do about time because it's 8:05 already. Jessica and Itzhak, and Ashanta, are we happy to keep talking for a little bit longer before we open to questions?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, great, lovely. So Sifton, I am very interested in the fact that you like, and this is going to seem so trite and ridiculous after our conversation, but bubble tea. I had to Google it, and I swear it looks absolutely revolting. Revolting.
You know what though?
Yeah,
That was what I
tapioca.
said. Yeah. That was actually what I said for years. I was like, I'm never, ever, ever, ever touching this stuff. Like, it just looks like, what are these weird dark things at the bottom of my drink? I don't get it. And then a couple of friends, I think just before I graduated high school, a couple of friends forced me to go to this one place, and I tried it. It was so delicious. I was like, oh
really?
my goodness.
Okay.
So it's one of those things, you either love it or you hate it.
Okay, well, I'll try.
You do need to try it at least once.
But my actual question isn't that at all. I have to say that. My actual question was about migration, and we were talking about what happens when a writer moves and what happens to their work and the way they perceive themselves and their work and how they produce work. So can you tell us a little bit about, you've moved a lot, I think. Can you tell us a little about your nomadic history and what that has meant for your book and your work?
Sure, yeah. So so I guess in regards to Yume, so I actually I did base the story on my experiences living in Japan, and I actually moved there twice. So before that, I guess I was born and raised in Canada, so I'd always grown up here, and I had moved from my hometown in Windsor to where I am now in the Greater Toronto area when I was about 5. So I hadn't really had a whole lot of experience moving homes per se. Schools was a little bit different, but yeah, I guess like my first kind of real immigration experience was the first time I moved to Japan. And then for extenuating circumstances, I had to move back to Canada. And then within about a year, I ended up returning to Japan. Again, because like of a whole list of reasons. So I don't know if my writing like style was really influenced by that, because I felt like I started with this story idea that eventually just kind of blended into my experiences, but the kind of the basic, I don't want to give the story away, but the basic foundations of the story that I had, it was actually a story idea that I had always wanted to write, but the characters weren't really there, and the kind of situations and scenarios that they might have gone through, they also weren't really there. So it kind of the story kind of came out like very organically, I think, with my living experiences in Japan, kind of being this, kind of visible foreigner who, clearly
sure,
stirred up a lot of curiosity and questions, and, sometimes some not so great reactions. But then also I got like a lot of really kind of, it was so funny. Like, just I would be, I'd be like, let's say I'm waiting at a bus stop, and someone will walk by and they'll suddenly just get so concerned because they know that I'm not from Japan, and they'll, suddenly this feeling will overtake them, and they'll run over and they'll be like, "Hey, are you lost? Are you okay? Do you know what bus you're waiting for?" And it's like, I'm just standing here because it's hot and I need shade. So it, kind of living with that day-to-day occurrence of all these kind of reactions that I would get. I think that's kind of what really kind of made the story blossom from those kind of initial ideas that I had always had about, this, BIPOC protagonist who's kind of going through things. And yeah, just kind of develops organically out of that, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. And is this book the first book published by Rare Machines, this new gender and press imprint?
No, there was there were several titles kind of all published around the same time.
I'm gonna say you were the first. I'm just gonna say I don't know the others. They're just
thank you.
Yeah. So congratulations on being the first title published with Rare Machines, Gender and Press's radical far-reaching new imprint. Yeah, it's very cool. That's cool. Guys, shall we open up for questions? Would anybody like to ask a question? If not, that's fine. I have lots I can ask Sifton, and we can keep chatting.
Yeah, ask away.
Yes. Ask yes,
it's Isak here. Sorry, I just want to say the people are muted at the moment. My gut feeling would be if somebody wants to pop a question, please just pop it into the chat and I can unmute you. Unless you want us to just unmute everybody and have a free for all.
That's okay. If people type a question into chat, I'll read it out and ask. Yes. So from Ashanta says, for Gabeba, can you talk a bit about the African Feminist Initiative?
Absolutely. It's my favorite thing about my job, which is that at Penn State, it so happened that without planning, 7 of us in different departments were working in the area of African feminism. And we proposed to our college, which is the College of Liberal Arts, to create an initiative around this, which they did support. And we've been able to hold conferences, workshops, and invite many scholars from the continent, and also to have some events on the continent and to attend feminist events on the continent, invite people to have residencies at Penn State. We have a 300 and more person listserv for people who are interested in African feminism, not only academics, but also artists and practitioners, activists, and just a gathering of human beings who love to explore and read and teach and draw on the support of one another. It's the loveliest, warmest list I've ever been a part of. So there are a number of elements to this, and unfortunately, of course, the pandemic has really narrowed our activities very much. So probably the most active we are is on our listserv, where I advertise this talk. Yeah, that's, oh, sorry, I should say that we've also published a special issue, and there are books and other publications emerging on African feminisms, which I think is a very vibrant field. And many people of my generation had never been taught anything called African feminism, perhaps 1 or 2 books sprinkled among other texts. But now people are hungry for African feminist courses, want to do a PhD that combines feminist studies and African studies, which we're working on at Penn State. So yeah, it's my favorite thing. in my work at Penn State, and I'm one of the co-directors. The others are Alicia Decker and Maha Marwan. And as I mentioned, we have 300 close friends in this initiative.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And Sifton, we were talking earlier about Gabeba's road to publication. And I had said before that, you know, it takes an awful lot of courage and belief in oneself and one's writing to say, yes, I'm going to get a publisher. I'd love to find a little bit about that journey for you and how you navigated it and how it came about.
Yeah, sure. I feel like I was very extremely lucky and extremely blessed in my road to publication. And I felt like the biggest hurdle or the biggest obstacle was strictly myself, because I mean, I've been kind of like writing stories, like really weird stories, since I was a kid. Like since I could write, I was always writing some kind of fiction. They're all in the garage, and I was going through them the other day, and I'm like, whoa, something was happening to me as a kid. So it like the road to this started early. Yeah, when I, you know, kind of growing up, I always thought, you know, oh, I'd love to be a writer because I love writing and da 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 da. I love sharing my story. You know, I would love to share my stories. And then even as I was writing Yume, I was, you know, there were moments where I was like, yo, this is golden. Like someone needs to read this. And then every year, yeah, but then every year I would look at what I had and say, nobody wants to read this. So I'm just gonna, yeah, like it's not ready. So, you know, I put it off for another year. I kept working on it, going back and forth between, I want to get this published one day and this should not be seen by anyone else's eyes. And then over a number of years, I started thinking, okay, I've spent so much time on it. I'm just gonna try. And if it doesn't happen, at least I can say that I tried. And then when I started actually kind of looking at different publishers, again, I had this self-doubt, you know, like, oh no, this publisher is not going to go for this kind of story, or, you know, this publisher, I think it's more stories like XYZ. And then I actually found it seemed like a really suitable publishing company. But again, something in the back of my head was like, no, it's not ready. And then that kind of, I guess that one time that I said it wasn't ready kind of saved me, because a big scandal came out about this publication later on. And I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. I dodged the bullet. So yeah, like I was, yeah, like I was really impressed, because for a few months I was like, oh, I missed the deadline. I'm so, you know, why did I not just send it? And then 3 months after that, I was like, but so yeah, and so I guess while I was kind of trying to get my foot into the writing world in the Toronto area, I joined a writing group for Black writers, and we had an online forum, and Scott Fraser from Dundurn Press put out a little APB saying, hey, if anyone has a manuscript that you think, you know, has like good, you know, might be a good candidate for being on a shelf, let me know. And again, I dragged my feet because I'm like, nah, he's not going to want to read it. And then finally I was like, okay, here's a sample. What do you think? And immediately he was like, I love it. I want to run with this. Like, I want to support this. Which blew my mind, because I thought I was going to have to deal with rejection after rejection after rejection. I actually gave Yume like 3 lives, and I said, if by the 3rd rejection, like it's like no one's picking it up, then I'm just gonna give up on it. So it actually had 2 more strikes, but it got, you know, Scott really wanted to see this in print, and yeah, it kind of went from there. You know, we set up a meeting, we talked about it, and next thing I know, it's like the ball was rolling, and I was like, but wait, I'm not ready. It's not ready. And everyone in the publishing team was like, don't worry, we're going to help you make it ready. So yeah, I got like, I was like I feel like my ancestors like on my side every step of the way. Because I think if I had, tried to publish it with that very first draft, even that wouldn't have worked, because I didn't have the 3 years of Japan life experience that I had. So I guess the book is based mostly on that first year that I spent in Japan. And that was just the tip of the iceberg with my experience, because I ended up, returning and then living there for 3 more years and learning so much more. And thinking back on it, I was like, okay, so this is why something was telling me it wasn't ready that first time, because it needed more, and it needed all of this. So yeah.
Well, I'm so glad you stuck with it. And
thank you.
To get published. So I'm so glad that Scott wasn't number 4, for example, because often people submit just the wrong people. It's got nothing to do with the quality of the work.
Yeah.
It's just the publisher doesn't like that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you found that courage and that self-belief, and that the book is in the world. And it's one thing, if I could say to more women authors, keep going, keep trying, find that belief somewhere, because men believe that they'll get there eventually. So they do. So not all men, obviously, but women, I think, need to keep trying until, for example. So congratulations, it's wonderful. And what's next? Are you writing another book?
Yeah.
Book?
So it's funny because every like I've been kind of MIA from the internet for a little bit, but now that I've kind of rejoined this past couple of days, I'm seeing a lot of, where's the sequel? Where's the sequel? So there is a book 2. And again, I'm gonna say like my tagline, it's not ready, but there is a book 2 in the works. It's more like a side story that takes place a little bit before Yume, but will hopefully kind of explain why the story of Yume happens. And then there's a book 3, which I still don't know about book 3, but book 3 is kind of like the main, okay, here's the whole explanation of why Yume is what it is. So there's a couple of books.
Lovely.
I'll try to work on them.
I'm so happy to hear that. You too.
Yeah.
And Gabeba, what's next for you?
I had a concussion a couple of years ago, and it really changed my brain. So I am trying to reconnect with my creativity, and I'm doing it by working with a writing coach. And it finally struck me that really writing about the struggle to write might be an interesting way to approach this, so that the absence of writing and the struggle to write might become part of the writing. So yeah, I don't know how long it'll take me to put together a new book, but I hope that'll be in my future. And in the meanwhile, I'll continue to read from these. And yeah, I love your story about a writing group, Sifton. I also found them to be completely enabling and encouraging, and also stern, because you have to do the work. Mm-hmm. And so for writers who struggle, and certainly for women writers, I think that's a magnificent way to go about nurturing your creativity, is to create a community if you don't find one. And these fellow writers, I think, can be there from the beginning to the end. I've certainly found for myself that the writing groups they're the people in my acknowledgements, because it feels to me like they made it possible, and they read and they listened to me reading. So yeah, it's writing groups are magical.
Yeah, it's wonderful to build a community for yourself and for your work. And yes, there's really nothing like that. And I think that is a very lovely note on which to end our fantastic discussion this evening. Thank you so much, both of you. This was great. It was wonderful. It was really wonderful to meet you both, and best of luck with everything. I hope these books fly off the shelves.
Thank you, Aoife. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you.